So, sitting around a campfire and decided to tell you guys a story. It's this bit of a long story, so bear with me. On April 27th, 2014, my mom called me and told me that she had stage 4 ovarian cancer. It was a bit of a shock. It was a bit of a rough news. Only a couple of months prior to that, my wife and I had taken my mom and dad to Disneyland, where we had just a great time. My mom actually was at Disneyland in August of 1955, which is only 2 months, or no, it's only a month after Disneyland opened. And then my mom and dad went on their honeymoon to Disneyland. It was fantastic. My mom calls me and says, I have stage 4 ovarian cancer, and it was a shock. It was. She started her first chemo treatment just a few weeks later, and I was at home making dinner for my wife, and I start getting this call. I start getting these text messages that my mom, something was going on, and I should probably think about coming down. And then I get a message saying, no, don't bother, she's fine. And then I get a message saying that her left lung collapsed and her right lung was only operating at half. So obviously I stopped what I was doing and drove down from Salem to Bend, Oregon, where my mom lived. Yeah, it was not good. But my mom, being the person she is, she pulled through it. When I saw her, she did not look good. She had a breathing tube in. And, yeah, I don't know how she did this. Breathing tube came out the next day. She pulled through. She was in the ICU for 3 or 4 days, and then it just admitted into the hospital for another 9 days, and she pulled through it somehow. I went to see her one day while she was in the hospital, while she was still in the hospital. And the drive from Salem, Oregon to Bend, Oregon is about 2 hours. And I was doing this 2 or 3 times a week. I was exhausted. I was burned out. So I go to see her, and we talk for a little bit, and she seems like she's doing okay. So I drove back home. And I got home at about 8 o'clock at night, and I walked in, and I literally just plopped down on the couch. My wife jumps up from her desk, runs over to me, sits down next to me, and holds out a pregnancy test. And it was positive. She had a positive pregnancy test in her hand. She was pregnant. And it was a great feeling because we'd been trying for a while, and it was just a magnificent, magnificent feeling. But I also had this apprehension about the whole thing because I've got a sick mom to deal with. I was unemployed. I felt like part of me was sort of ripping in half a little bit. Part of me has to be over with my mom. Part of me's got to deal with this new child on the way. My dad wasn't able to take care of my mom because he has an early stage of dementia. On the morning of June 9th, 2014, I was sleeping. Very early in the morning. It's like 5 in the morning. My phone rang. And I grabbed my phone and I fumbled with it, and I couldn't get it to answer because I was sleep deprived, fumbling with it. And I looked at it, and it was my mom's caregiver. And it's like, why in the hell did she call me at 5 o'clock in the morning? And then she called back. And she said, I'm sorry, your mom is dead. I actually said to her, what the fuck did you say to me? And I was so angry. I was just angry. I hung up with her, told my wife, and we drove down to Bend to figure out what the hell was going on. And that was kind of when we broke the news to the family that my wife was pregnant. Pregnancy went well. We had lots of ultrasounds done. Everything seemed to be just going fine. Still kind of reeling back on the mom situation, but at that point, really, there was nothing I could do about that. I just had to focus on what I had in front of me. months and months go by, and the morning of January 23rd, 2015, my wife and I get up, and we go to the hospital. Anyway, they had to induce my wife's labor because there was something about gestational diabetes, which I don't even kind of understand. Apparently, it's a perfectly normal thing that happens all the time. By the way, we knew we were having a boy, and we named him Killian. We went through about 5 million names, and then one day I started calling him Killian. Honestly, I was getting kind of fed up with my wife's indecision on the name situation. So I just started calling him Killian, and my wife just loved it. She thought it was a perfect name. We're at the hospital, and we're waiting around, and we're waiting around, and we're waiting around, and we're waiting around, and finally my wife starts going into labor. It was about 6 o'clock at night. She started going into labor. We had been there since about 7 o'clock in the morning. The only real thing I knew about deliveries, about delivering a baby, I learned from watching Monty Python's The Meaning of Life. I was sorely disappointed that in that room they didn't have the machine that goes bing. It was a bummer to me. I didn't have to go boil water. I still don't know why that was ever a thing. The moment of delivery happens. The doctor's there. It was Dr. Renard. Very nice woman. She, for some reason, had blue hair. So, 9:40 p.m., doctor says, "Oh, I can see hair." And one of the conversations my wife and I had, arguments really, was, is Killian going to have my blonde hair or her dark hair? And we both just sat there in anticipation. And I asked, "What color's the hair?" And the doctor looked at me and said, "Well, it's still blue." And for some reason, in my head, I thought, okay, well, maybe babies are born with blue hair. And, of course, she was talking about her own hair. The nurse leaned over and said, "I think he means the baby's hair." "Oh, it's brown." Killian had my wife's brown hair. It was cool. It was, and then he was born. He was out. The doctor was holding him. And, it was, I can't describe, if you've ever had a child, if you ever watched your own child be delivered, there's nothing like it. It's phenomenal. The best feeling I have ever had, and it was followed by the worst. Killian was breathing. He was alive. He wasn't stillborn. But he was having a hard time breathing. The nurses and doctors quickly pulled him away and put him inside this little fucking box thing, and began working on him. They put a breathing tube in him to help him breathe. There was a code called, and I had no idea what was going on. I'm standing there. My wife and I are sitting there staring at each other going, what's going on? And after a moment or so, what's going on? To the doctors, and they explained to me that he was having a hard time breathing, and they didn't know why, and they were going to get him checked out and see what was going on. I was like, okay, we can get through this. This is fine. And then they decided that they needed to take him to Dornbecker's Hospital in Portland. Now, which would have been fine. Portland was about a 2-hour drive from where we were, and it was decided that he couldn't make that trip. He had to go somewhere closer. In Salem, they had the Neonatal Intensive Care Unit, which is the intensive care for babies. He was taken there by Dornbecker's. Dornbecker's brought an ambulance down to Salem, or to Silverton, Oregon, and they drove him to Salem. My wife had to stay in Silverton because she had this epidural. She couldn't get into a car and drive anywhere. And yeah, it was a nightmare. I felt like I was being ripped in half. You know, part of me's got to stay with my wife. Part of me's got to go with this kid. And I didn't know what to do. And I walked in and I told Jamie what was going on and what we had to do. And she said, "Well, you're staying with him." And that answered it for me. I mean, that really did answer it for me. My wife's sister stayed with her, and I went with Killian. Maybe 20 minutes after I got there, I met with the doctor. And he said, "I don't think there's anything we can do for him." Turned out Killian's lungs were about 1/3 the size they should have been. Nothing an ultrasound ever would have seen. About an hour later, my wife showed up at the hospital. And she was in a wheelchair because she couldn't move her legs. Or she could move her legs, they were just really sore or something. I've never been through childbirth. I don't know what you feel like after that. I'm assuming it's not a good feeling. Or physically not a good feeling. Anyway, I decided right away I'm not telling her what that doctor told me. I'm just gonna ride it out. See what happens and hope that we can resolve this. So hours go by, hours and hours go by, and I'm standing there. My wife and I are standing there with Killian. I was standing there and I was holding on to his little hand, that little tiny hand, and he squeezed my fingers so hard, and that was hope. And then he opened his eyes, most blue eyes I've ever seen. So, the doctor comes up and says he needs to run a few tests. And my wife and I are okay. And they gave us a hospital room to go and relax in. Or go hang out in. I guess we didn't relax at all. And the doctor comes in. He's this old man. Just super old. He comes in. And he says, "I'm sorry, there's nothing we can do." All the family was called. Everybody came down to the hospital to see him. At 3:40 p.m. Saturday, January 24th, 2015, Killian died.